Toward daylight of the same morning, Tom Canty stirred out of a heavy sleep and opened his eyes in the dark. He lay silent a few moments, trying to analyze his confused thoughts and impressions and get some sort of meaning out of them. Then suddenly he burst out in a rapturous but guarded voice. "I see it all, I see it all. Now God be thanked, I am indeed awake at last. Come joy, vanish sorrow. Ho Nan, Bet, kick off your straw and hie ye hither to my side, till I do pour into your unbelieving ears the wildest madcap dream that ever the spirits of night did conjure up to astonish the soul of man withal. Ho Nan, I say, Bet." A dim form appeared at his side, and a voice said, "Wilt deign to deliver thy commands?" "Commands? Oh, woe is me, I know thy voice. Speak thou who am I, thou. In sooth, yesternight wert thou the Prince of Wales, today art thou my most gracious liege, Edward, King of England." Tom buried his head among his pillows, murmuring plaintively, "Alack, it was no dream. Go to thy rest, sweet sir, leave me to my sorrows." Tom slept again, and after a time he had this pleasant dream. He thought it was summer, and he was playing all alone in the fair meadow, called Goodman's Fields, when a dwarf only a foot high with long red whiskers and a humped back appeared to him suddenly and said, "Dig by that stump." He did so, and found 12 bright new pennies. Wonderful riches! Yet this was not the best of it, for the dwarf said, "I know thee. Thou art a good lad and a deserving, thy distresses shall end, for the day of thy reward is come. Dig here every 7th day, and thou shalt find always the same treasure, 12 bright new pennies. Tell none, keep the secret." Then the dwarf vanished, and Tom flew to awful court with his prize, saying to himself, "Every night will I give my father a penny, he will think I begged it, it will glad his heart, and I shall no more be beaten. 1 penny every week the good priest that teacheth me shall have. Mother, Nan, and Bet the other 4. We be done with hunger and rags. Now done with fears and frets and savage usage." In his dream he reached his sordid home all out of breath, but with eyes dancing with grateful enthusiasm, cast 4 of his pennies into his mother's lap and cried out, "They are for thee, all of them, every one, for thee and Nan and Bet, and honestly come by, not begged nor stolen." The happy and astonished mother strained him to her breast and exclaimed, "It waxeth late, may it please your majesty to rise?" Ah, that was not the answer he was expecting. The dream had snapped. Asunder he was awake. He opened his eyes. The richly clad first lord of the bedchamber was kneeling by his couch. The gladness of the lying dream faded away. The poor boy recognized that he was still a captive and a king. The room was filled with courtiers clothed in purple mantles the morning color, and with noble servants of the monarch. Tom sat up in bed and gazed out from the heavy silken curtains upon this fine company. The weighty business of dressing began, and one courtier after another knelt and paid his court and offered to the little king his condolences upon his heavy loss, whilst the dressing proceeded. In the beginning, a shirt was taken up by the chief equerry in waiting, who passed it to the first lord of the Buckhounds, who passed it to the second gentleman of the bedchamber, who passed it to the head ranger of Windsor Forest, who passed it to the third groom of the stole, who passed it to the Chancellor Royal of the Duchy of Lancaster, who passed it to the master of the wardrobe, who passed it to Norroy King-at-Arms, who passed it to the Constable of the Tower, who passed it to the chief steward of the household, who passed it to the hereditary Grand Diaperer, who passed it to the Lord High Admiral of England, who passed it to the Archbishop of Canterbury, who passed it to the First Lord of the Bedchamber, who took what was left of it and put it on Tom. Poor little wondering chap, it reminded him of passing buckets at a fire. Each garment in its turn had to go through this slow and solemn process. Consequently, Tom grew very weary of the ceremony, so weary that he felt an almost gushing gratefulness when he at last saw his long silken hose begin the journey down the line, and knew that the end of the matter was drawing near. But he exulted too soon. The first lord of the bedchamber received the hose, and was about to encase Tom's legs in them, when a sudden flush invaded his face, and he hurriedly hustled the things back into the hands of the Archbishop of Canterbury with an astounded look and a whispered, "See, my lord," pointing to a something connected with the hose. The Archbishop paled, then flushed, and passed the hose to the Lord High Admiral, whispering, "See, my lord." The Admiral passed the hose to the hereditary Grand Diaperer, and had hardly breath enough in his body to ejaculate, "See, my lord." The hose drifted backward along the line, to the chief steward of the household, the Constable of the Tower, Norroy King-at-Arms, the Master of the Wardrobe, the Chancellor Royal of the Duchy of Lancaster, the third groom of the Stole, the head ranger of Windsor Forest, the second gentleman of the bedchamber, the first lord of the Buckhounds, accompanied always with that amazed and frightened "See, see," till they finally reached the hands of the chief equerry in waiting, who gazed a moment with a pallid face upon what had caused all this dismay, then hoarsely whispered, "Body of my life, a tag gone from a truss point to the Tower with the head keeper of the king's hose." After which he leaned upon the shoulder of the first lord of the Buckhounds to regather his vanished strength, whilst fresh hose, without any damaged strings to them, were brought. But all things must have an end, and so in time Tom Canty was in a condition to get out of bed. The proper official poured water, the proper official engineered the washing, the proper official stood by with a towel, and by Tom got safely through the purifying stage and was ready for the services of the hairdresser royal. When he at length emerged from this master's hands, he was a gracious figure and as pretty as a girl, in his mantle and trunks of purple satin and purple-plumed cap. He now moved in state toward his breakfast-room through the midst of the courtly assemblage, and as he passed, these fell back, leaving his way free, and dropped upon their knees. After breakfast he was conducted, with regal ceremony, attended by his great officers, and his guard of 50 gentlemen pensioners bearing gilt battle-axes, to the throne-room, where he proceeded to transact business of state. His uncle, Lord Hertford, took his stand by the throne to assist the royal mind with wise counsel. The body of illustrious men named by the late king as his executors appeared to ask Tom's approval of certain acts of theirs, rather of form, and yet not wholly of form, since there was no protector as yet. The Archbishop of Canterbury made report of the decree of the Council of Executors concerning the obsequies of his late most illustrious Majesty, and finished by reading the signatures of the executors, to wit, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Lord Chancellor of England, William, Lord St. John, John Lord Russell, Edward Earl of Hertford, John, Viscount Lisle, Cuthbert Bishop of Durham. Tom was not listening. An earlier clause of the document was puzzling him. At this point he turned and whispered to Lord Hertford, "What day did he say the burial hath been appointed for?" "The 16th of the coming month, my liege." "'Tis a strange folly. Will he keep?" Poor chap, he was still new to the customs of royalty. He was used to seeing the forlorn dead of awful court hustled out of the way with a very different sort of expedition. However, the Lord Hertford set his mind at rest with a word or two. A Secretary of State presented an order of the Council appointing the morrow at 11 for the reception of the foreign ambassadors, and desired the king's assent. Tom turned an inquiring look toward Hertford, who whispered, "Your Majesty will signify consent. They come to testify their royal master's sense of the heavy calamity which hath visited your grace and the realm of England." Tom did as he was bidden. Another secretary began to read a preamble concerning the expenses of the late king's household, which had amounted to £28,000 during the preceding 6 months, a sum so vast that it made Tom Canty gasp. He gasped again when the fact appeared that £20,000 of this money was still owing and unpaid. 9. And once more when it appeared that the king's coffers were about empty, and his 1,200 servants much embarrassed for lack of the wages due them. Tom spoke out, with lively apprehension. "We be going to the dogs, 'tis plain. 'Tis meet and necessary that we take a smaller house and set the servants at large, sit they be of no value but to make delay, and trouble one with offices that harass the spirit and shame the soul, they misbecoming any but a doll, that hath nor brains, nor hands to help itself withal. I remember me of a small house that standeth over against the fish market by Billingsgate." A sharp pressure upon Tom's arm stopped his foolish tongue, and sent a blush to his face, but no countenance there betrayed any sign that this strange speech had been remarked or given concern. A secretary made report that forasmuch as the late king had provided in his will for conferring the ducal degree upon the Earl of Hertford and raising his brother Sir Thomas Seymour to the peerage and likewise Hertford's son to an earldom, together with similar aggrandizements to other great servants of the crown, the council had resolved to hold a sitting on the 16th of February for the delivering and confirming of these honors, and that meantime the late king not having granted, in writing, estates suitable to the support of these dignities, the council, knowing his private wishes in that regard, had thought proper to grant to Seymour £500 lands, and to Hertford's son £800 lands, and £300 of the next bishop's lands which should fall vacant, his present majesty being willing. Tom was about to blurt out something about the propriety of paying the late king's debts first before squandering all this money, but a timely touch upon his arm from the thoughtful Hertford saved him this indiscretion, wherefore he gave the royal assent, without spoken comment, but with much inward discomfort, while he sat reflecting a moment over the ease with which he was doing strange and glittering miracles. A happy thought shot into his mind. Why not make his mother Duchess of Awful Court, and give her an estate? But a sorrowful thought swept it instantly away. He was only a king in name, these grave veterans and great nobles were his masters. To them his mother was only the creature of a diseased mind. They would simply listen to his project with unbelieving ears, then send for the doctor. The dull work went tediously on. Petitions were read, and proclamations, patents, and all manner of wordy, repetitious, and wearisome papers relating to the public business, and at last Tom sighed pathetically and murmured to himself, "In what have I offended that the good God should take me away from the fields and the free air and the sunshine, to shut me up here and make me a king and afflict me so?" Then his poor muddled head nodded a while, and presently drooped to his shoulder, and the business of the empire came to a standstill for want of that august factor, the ratifying power. Silence ensued around. The slumbering child and the sages of the realm ceased from their deliberations. During the forenoon, Tom had an enjoyable hour by permission of his keepers, Hertford and St. John, with the Lady Elizabeth and the little Lady Jane Grey, though the spirits of the princesses were rather subdued by the mighty stroke that had fallen upon the royal house, and at the end of the visit his elder sister, afterwards the Bloody Mary of history, chilled him with a solemn interview which had but one merit in his eyes, its brevity. He had a few moments to himself, and then a slim lad of about 12 years of age was admitted to his presence, whose clothing, except his snowy ruff and the laces about his wrists, was of black, doublet, hose, and all. He bore no badge of mourning but a knot of purple ribbon on his shoulder. He advanced hesitatingly, with head bowed and bare, and dropped upon one knee in front of Tom. Tom sat still and contemplated him soberly a moment. Then he said, "Rise, lad. Who art thou? What wouldst have?" The boy rose and stood at graceful ease, but with an aspect of concern in his face. He said, "Of a surety thou must remember me, my lord. I am thy whipping boy." "My whipping boy?" "The same, your grace. I am Humphrey Marlowe." Tom perceived that here was someone whom his keepers ought to have posted him about. The situation was delicate. What should he do? Pretend he knew this lad, and then betray by his every utterance that he had never heard of him before? No, that would not do. An idea came to his relief. Accidents like this might be likely to happen with some frequency, now that business urgencies would often call Hertford and St. John from his side, they being members of the Council of Executors. Therefore perhaps it would be well to strike out a plan himself to meet the requirements of such emergencies. Yes, that would be a wise course. He would practice on this boy, and see what sort of success he might achieve. So he stroked his brow perplexedly a moment or two, and presently said, "Now I seem to remember thee somewhat, but my wit is clogged and dim with suffering." "Alack, my poor master!" ejaculated the whipping boy with feeling, adding to himself, "In truth 'tis as they said, his mind is gone, alas! Poor soul! But misfortune catch me, how am I forgetting? They said one must not seem to observe that aught is wrong with him. 'Tis strange how my memory doth wanton with me these days," said Tom. "But mind it not, I mend apace, a little clue doth often serve to bring me back again the things and names which had escaped me. Give thy business speech." "'Tis matter of small weight, my liege, yet will I touch upon it, and it please your grace. 2 days gone by, when your majesty faulted thrice in your Greek in the morning lessons, dost remember it?" "Yes, methinks I do." "Yes, I do recall it. Now go on." "The master, being wroth with what he termed such slovenly and doltish work, did promise that he would soundly whip me for it, and—" "Whip thee?" said Tom, astonished out of his presence of mind. "Why should he whip thee for faults of mine?" "Ah, your grace forgetteth again. He always scourgeth me when thou dost fail in thy lessons." "True, I had forgot. Thou teachest me in private, then if I fail, he argueth that thy office was lamely done, and—" "Oh, my liege, what words are these? I, the humblest of thy servants, presume to teach thee? Then where is thy blame? What riddle is this? Am I in truth gone mad? Or is it thou? Explain, speak out. But, good your majesty, there's naught that needeth simplifying. None may visit the sacred person of the Prince of Wales with blows. Wherefore, when he faulteth, 'tis I that take them, and meet it is and right, for that it is mine office and my livelihood." Tom stared at the tranquil boy, observing to himself, "Lo, it is a wonderful thing, a most strange and curious trade. I marvel they have not hired a boy to take my combings and my dressings for me. Would heaven they would! And they will do this thing. I will take my lashings in mine own person, giving God thanks for the change." Then he said, aloud, "And hast thou been beaten, poor friend, according to the promise?" "No, good your majesty, my punishment was appointed for this day, and peradventure it may be annulled, as unbefitting the season of mourning that is come upon us. I know not, and so have made bold to come hither, and remind your grace about your gracious promise to intercede in my behalf with the master, to save thee thy whipping. Ah, thou dost remember. My memory mendeth, thou sayest. Set thy mind at ease, thy back shall go unscathed, I will see to it." "Oh, thanks, my good lord," cried the boy, dropping upon his knee again. "Mayhap I have ventured far enow, and yet—" Seeing Master Humphrey hesitate, Tom encouraged him to go on, saying he was in the granting mood. "Then will I speak it out, for it lieth near my heart. Sit thou art no more Prince of Wales but King, thou canst order matters as thou wilt, with none to say thee nay. Wherefore it is not in reason that thou wilt longer vex thyself with dreary studies, but wilt burn thy books and turn thy mine to things less irksome. Then am I ruined and mine orphan sisters. With me? Ruined? Prithee how? My back is my bread, O my gracious liege. If it go idle I starve. And thou? Cease from study, mine office is gone, thou lt need no whipping boy. Do not turn me away. Tom was touched with this pathetic distress. He said with a right royal burst of generosity, Discomfort thyself no further, lad. Thine office shall be permanent in thee and thy line forever. Then he struck the boy a light blow on the shoulder with the flat of his sword, exclaiming, Rise, Humphrey. Marlowe, hereditary grand whipping boy to the royal house of England. Banish sorrow, I will betake me to my books again and study. So ill that they must in justice treble thy wage, so mightily shall the business of thine office be augmented. The grateful Humphrey responded fervidly, Thanks, most noble master, this princely lavishness doth far surpass my most distempered dreams of fortune. Now shall I be happy all my days, and all the house of Marlowe after me. Tom had wit enough to perceive that here was a lad who could be useful to him. He encouraged Humphrey to talk, and he was nothing loath. He was delighted to believe that he was helping in Tom's cure. For always, as soon as he had finished calling back to Tom's diseased mind the various particulars of his experiences and adventures in the royal schoolroom, and elsewhere about the palace, he noticed that Tom was then able to recall the circumstances quite clearly. At the end of an hour Tom found himself well freighted with very valuable information concerning personages and matters pertaining to the court, so he resolved to draw instruction from this source daily, and to this end he would give order to admit Humphrey to the royal closet whenever he might come, provided the majesty of England was not engaged with other people. Humphrey had hardly been dismissed when my Lord Hertford arrived with more trouble for Tom. He said that the lords of the council, fearing that some overwrought report of the king's damaged health might have leaked out and got abroad, they deemed it wise and best that his majesty should begin to dine in public after a day or two. His wholesome complexion and vigorous step, assisted by a carefully guarded repose of manner and ease and grace of demeanor, would more surely quiet the general pulse in case any evil rumors had gone about than any other scheme that could be devised. Then the Earl proceeded very delicately to instruct Tom as to the observances proper to the stately occasion, under the rather thin disguise of reminding him concerning things already known to him, but to his vast gratification it turned out that Tom needed very little help in this line. He had been making use of Humphrey in that direction, for Humphrey had mentioned that within a few days he was to begin to dine in public, having gathered it from the swift-winged gossip of the court. Tom kept these facts to himself, however. Seeing the royal memory so improved, the Earl ventured to apply a few tests to it, in an apparently casual way, to find out how far its amendment had progressed. The results were happy here and there in spots where Humphrey's tracks remained, and on the whole my lord was greatly pleased and encouraged. So encouraged was he, indeed, that he spoke up and said in a quite hopeful voice, Now am I persuaded that if your majesty will but tax your memory yet a little further, it will resolve the puzzle of the Great Seal, a loss which was of moment yesterday, although of none today, since its term of service ended with our late lord's life. May it please your grace to make the trial. Tom was at sea. A Great Seal was something which he was totally unacquainted with. After a moment's hesitation he looked up innocently and asked, What was it like, my lord? The Earl started almost imperceptibly, muttering to himself, Alack, his wits are flown again. It was ill wisdom to lead him on to strain them. Then he deftly turned the talk to other matters, with the purpose of sweeping the unlucky Seal out of Tom's thoughts, a purpose which easily succeeded. The next day the foreign ambassadors came, with their gorgeous trains, and Tom, throned in awful state, received them. The splendors of the Scene delighted his eye and fired his imagination at first, but the audience was long and dreary, and so were most of the addresses. Wherefore, what began as a pleasure grew into weariness and homesickness. By and by, Tom said the words which Hertford put into his mouth from time to time, and tried hard to acquit himself satisfactorily. But he was too new to such things, and too ill at ease to accomplish more than a tolerable success. He looked sufficiently like a king, but he was ill, able to feel like one. He was cordially glad when the ceremony was ended. The larger part of his day was wasted, as he termed it, in his own mind in labors pertaining to his royal office. Even the 2 hours devoted to certain princely pastimes and recreations were rather a burden to him than otherwise. They were so fettered by restrictions and ceremonious observances. However, he had a private hour with his whipping boy which he counted clear gain, since he got both entertainment and needful information out of it. The 3rd day of Tom Canty's kingship came and went much as the others had done, but there was a lifting of his cloud in one way. He felt less uncomfortable than at first. He was getting a little used to his circumstances and surroundings. His chains still galled, but not all the time. He found that the presence and homage of the great afflicted and embarrassed him less and less sharply with every hour that drifted over his head. But for one single dread, he could have seen the 4th day approach without serious distress. The dining in public, it was to begin that day. There were greater matters in the program, for on that day he would have to preside at a council which would take his views and commands concerning the policy to be pursued toward various foreign nations, scattered far and near over the great globe. On that day, too, Hertford would be formally chosen to the grand office of Lord Protector. Other things of note were appointed for that 4th day, also, but to Tom they were all insignificant compared with the ordeal of dining all by himself, with a multitude of curious eyes fastened upon him, and a multitude of mouths whispering comments upon his performance, and upon his mistakes, if he should be so unlucky as to make any. Still, nothing could stop that 4th day, and so it came. It found poor Tom low-spirited and absent-minded, and this mood continued. He could not shake it off. The ordinary duties of the morning dragged upon his hands and wearied him. Once more he felt the sense of captivity heavy upon him. Late in the forenoon he was in a large audience chamber, conversing with the Earl of Hertford and dully awaiting the striking of the hour appointed for a visit of ceremony from a considerable number of great officials and courtiers. After a little while Tom, who had wandered to a window and become interested in the life and movement of the great highway beyond the palace gates, and not idly interested, but longing with all his heart to take part in person in its stir and freedom, saw the van of a hooting and shouting mob of disorderly men, women, and children of the lowest and poorest degree approaching from up the road. "I would I knew what 'tis about," he exclaimed with all a boy's curiosity. "In such happenings, thou art the king," solemnly responded the Earl with a reverence. "Have I your grace's leave to act?" "Oh, blithely, yes." "Oh, gladly, yes," exclaimed Tom excitedly, adding to himself with a lively sense of satisfaction, "In truth, being a king is not all dreariness, it hath its compensations and conveniences." The Earl called a page, and sent him to the captain of the guard with the order, "Let the mob be halted, and inquiry made concerning the occasion of its movement, by the king's command." A few seconds later a long rank of the royal guards, cased in flashing steel, filed out at the gates and formed across the highway in front of the multitude. A messenger returned to report that the crowd were following a man, a woman, and a young girl to execution for crimes committed against the peace and dignity of the realm. Death, and a violent death, for these poor unfortunates. The thought wrung Tom's heartstrings. The spirit of compassion took control of Him, to the exclusion of all other considerations, he never thought of the offended laws, or of the grief or loss which these three criminals had inflicted upon their victims. He could think of nothing but the scaffold, and the grisly fate hanging over the heads of the condemned. His concern made him even forget, for the moment, that he was but the false shadow of a king, not the substance, and before he knew it he had blurted out the command, "Bring them here." Then he blushed scarlet, and a sort of apology sprung to his lips, but, observing that his order had wrought no sort of surprise in the earl or the waiting page, he suppressed the words he was about to utter. The page, in the most matter-of-course way, made a profound obeisance and retired backwards out of the room to deliver the command. Tom experienced a glow of pride and a renewed sense of the compensating advantages of the kingly office. He said to himself, "Truly it is like what I was used to feel when I read the old priest's tales, and did imagine mine own self a prince, giving law and command to all, saying do this, do that, whilst none durst offer let or hindrance to my will." Now the doors swung open, one high-sounding title after another was announced, the personages owning them followed, and the place was quickly half filled with noble folk and finery. But Tom was hardly conscious of the presence of these people, so wrought up was he and so intensely absorbed in that other and more interesting matter. He seated himself absently in his chair of state, and turned his eyes upon the door, with manifestations of impatient expectancy, seeing which the company forbore to trouble him, and fell to chatting a mixture of public business and court gossip one with another. In a little while the measured tread of military men was heard approaching, and the culprits entered the presence in charge of an under-sheriff and escorted by a detail of the king's guard. The civil officer knelt before Tom, then stood aside. The three doomed persons knelt also and remained so. The guard took position behind Tom's chair. Tom scanned the prisoners curiously. Something about the dress or appearance of the man had stirred a vague memory in him. "Methinks I have seen this man ere now, but the when or the where fail me." Such was Tom's thought. Just then the man glanced quickly up and quickly dropped his face again, not being able to endure the awful port of sovereignty, but the one full glimpse of the face which Tom got was sufficient. He said to himself, "Now is the matter clear. This is the stranger that plucked Giles' wit out of the Thames and saved his life that windy bitter first day of the new year, a brave good deed. Pity he hath been doing baser ones and got himself in this sad case. I have not forgot the day, neither the hour, by reason that an hour after, upon the stroke of 11, I did get a hiding by the hand of Gammer Canty, which was of so goodly and admired severity that all that went before or followed after it were but fondlings and caresses by comparison." Tom now ordered that the woman and the girl be removed from the presence for a little time, then addressed himself to the under-sheriff, saying, "Good sir, what is this man's offense?" The officer knelt and answered, "So please your majesty, he hath taken the life of a subject by poison." Tom's compassion for the prisoner and admiration of him as the daring rescuer of a drowning boy experienced a most damaging shock. "The thing was proven upon him?" he asked. "Most clearly, sire." Tom sighed and said, "Take him away, he hath earned his death. 'Tis a pity, for he was a brave heart. Na, I mean he hath the look of it." The prisoner clasped his hands together with sudden energy and wrung them despairingly, at the same time appealing imploringly to the king, in broken and terrified phrases. "O my lord the king, and thou canst pity the lost, have pity upon me. I am innocent, neither hath that wherewith I am charged been more than but lamely proved, yet I speak not of that. The judgment is gone forth against me, and may not suffer alteration. Yet in mine extremity I beg a boon, for my doom is more than I can bear. A grace, my lord the King, in thy royal compassion grant my prayer, give commandment that I be hanged. Tom was amazed. This was not the outcome he had looked for. Odds my life, a strange boon. Was it not the fate intended thee? O good my liege, not so. It is ordered that I be boiled alive. 13. The hideous surprise of these words almost made Tom spring from his chair. As soon as he could recover his wits he cried out, Have thy wish, poor soul! And thou had poisoned 100 men, thou shouldst not suffer so miserable a death. The prisoner bowed his face to the ground and burst into passionate expressions of gratitude, ending with, If ever thou shouldst know misfortune which God forfend, may thy goodness to me this day be remembered and requited. Tom turned to the Earl of Hertford and said, My lord, is it believable that there was warrant for this man's ferocious doom? It is the law, your grace, for poisoners. In Germany coiners be boiled to death in oil not cast in of a sudden, but by a rope let down into the oil, by degrees and slowly, first the feet, then the legs, then. Oh, prithee no more, my lord, I cannot bear it, cried Tom, covering his eyes with his hands to shut out the picture. I beseech your good lordship that order be taken to change this law. Oh, let no more poor creatures be visited with its tortures. The Earl's face showed profound gratification, for he was a man of merciful and generous impulses, a thing not very common with his class. In that fierce age, he said, These your grace's noble words have sealed its doom. History will remember it to the honor of your royal house. The under-sheriff was about to remove his prisoner. Tom gave him a sign to wait, then he said, Good sir, I would look into this matter further. The man has said his deed was but lamely proved. Tell me what thou knowest. If the king's grace please, it did appear upon the trial that this man entered into a house in the hamlet of Islington where one lay sick. 3 witnesses say it was at 10 of the clock in the morning, and 2 say it was some minutes later, the sick man being alone at the time, and sleeping. And presently the man came forth again, and went his way. The sick man died within the hour, being torn with spasms and retchings. Did any see the poison given? Was poison found? Marry, no, my liege. Then how doth one know there was poison given at all? Please your majesty, the doctors testified that none die with such symptoms but by poison. Weighty evidence this in that simple age. Tom recognized its formidable nature, and said, The doctor knoweth his trade, belike they were right. The matter hath an ill look for this poor man. Yet was not this all, your majesty, there is more and worse. Many testified that a witch, since gone from the village, none know whither, did foretell, and speak it privately in their ears, that the sick man would die by poison, and more, that a stranger would give it, a stranger with brown hair and clothed in a worn and common garb, and surely this prisoner doth answer woundily to the bill. Please your majesty to give the circumstance that solemn weight which is its due, seeing it was foretold. This was an argument of tremendous force in that superstitious day. Tom felt that the thing was settled. If evidence was worth anything, this poor fellow's guilt was proved. Still he offered the prisoner a chance, saying, If thou canst say aught in thy behalf, speak. Not that will avail, my king. I am innocent, yet cannot I make it appear. I have no friends, else might I show that I was not in Islington that day, so also might I show that at that hour they name I was above a league away, seeing I was at Wapping Old Stairs. Ye more, my king, for I could show that whilst they say I was taking life, I was saving it. Drowning boy. Peace. Sheriff, name the day the deed was done. At 10 in the morning, or some minutes later, the first day of the new year, most illustrious. Let the prisoner go free, it is the king's will. Another blush followed this unregal outburst, and he covered his indecorum as well as he could by adding, It enrageth me that a man should be hanged upon such idle, harebrained evidence. A low buzz of admiration swept through the assemblage. It was not admiration of the decree that had been delivered by Tom, for the propriety or expediency of pardoning a convicted poisoner was a thing which few there would have felt justified in either admitting or admiring. No, the admiration was for the intelligence and spirit which Tom had displayed. Some of the low-voiced remarks were to this effect: "This is no mad king, he hath his wits sound. How sanely he put his questions, how like his former natural self was. This abrupt imperious disposal of the matter. God be thanked, his infirmity is spent. This is no weakling, but a king. He hath borne himself like to his own father." The air being filled with applause, Tom's ear necessarily caught a little of it. The effect which this had upon him was to put him greatly at his ease, and also to charge his system with very gratifying sensations. However, his juvenile curiosity soon rose superior to these pleasant thoughts and feelings. He was eager to know what sort of deadly mischief the woman and the little girl could have been about. So, by his command, the two terrified and sobbing creatures were brought before him. "What is it that these have done?" he inquired of the sheriff. "Please your majesty, a black crime is charged upon them, and clearly proven, wherefore the judges have decreed, according to the law, that they be hanged. They sold themselves to the devil, such is their crime." Tom shuddered. He had been taught to abhor people who did this wicked thing. Still, he was not going to deny himself the pleasure of feeding his curiosity for all that, so he asked, "Where was this done? And when?" "On a midnight in December, in a ruined church, your majesty." Tom shuddered again. "Who was there present?" "Only these two, your grace, and that other." "Have these confessed?" "Nay, not so, sire, they do deny it." "Then prithee, how was it known?" "Certain witness did see them wending thither, good your majesty. This bred the suspicion, and dire effects have since confirmed and justified it. In particular, it is in evidence that through the wicked power so obtained they did invoke and bring about a storm that wasted all the region round about. Above 40 witnesses have proved the storm, and sooth one might have had 1,000, for all had reason to remember it, sith all had suffered by it. Certes, this is a serious matter." Tom turned this dark piece of scoundrelism over in his mind a while, then asked, "Suffered the woman also by the storm?" Several old heads among the assemblage nodded their recognition of the wisdom of this question. The sheriff, however, saw nothing consequential in the inquiry. He answered, with simple directness, "Indeed did she, your majesty, and most righteously, as all aver. Her habitation was swept away, and herself and child left shelterless. Methinks the power to do herself so ill a turn was dearly bought. She had been cheated, had she paid but a farthing for it, that she paid her soul, and her child's argueth that she is mad. If she is mad, she knoweth not what she doth, therefore sinneth not." The elderly heads nodded recognition of Tom's wisdom once more, and one individual murmured, "And the king be mad himself, according to report. Then is it a madness of a sort that would improve the sanity of some I wot of, if by the gentle providence of God they could but catch it." "What age hath the child?" asked Tom. 9 years, please your majesty. By the law of England may a child enter into covenant and sell itself, my lord?" asked Tom, turning to a learned judge. "The law doth not permit a child to make or meddle in any weighty matter, good my liege, holding that its callow wit unfitteth it to cope with the riper wit and evil schemings of them that are its elders. The devil may buy a child if he so choose, and the child agree thereto, but not an Englishman. In this latter case the contract would be null and void. It seemeth a rude unchristian thing, and ill-contrived, that English law deneth privileges to Englishmen to waste them on the devil," cried Tom, with honest heat. This novel view of the matter excited many smiles, and was stored away in many heads to be repeated about the court as evidence of Tom's originality as well as progress toward mental health. The elder culprit had ceased from sobbing and was hanging upon Tom's words with an excited interest and a growing hope. Tom noticed this, and it strongly inclined his sympathies toward her in her perilous and unfriended situation. Presently he asked, "How wrought they to bring the storm?" "By pulling off their stockings, sire." This astonished Tom, and also fired his curiosity to fever heat. He said, eagerly, "It is wonderful. Hath it always this dread effect?" "Always, my liege, at least if the woman desire it, and utter the needful words, either in her mind or with her tongue." Tom turned to the woman, and said with impetuous zeal, "Exert thy power, I would see a storm." There was a sudden paling of cheeks in the superstitious assemblage, and a general, though unexpressed, desire to get out of the place all of which was lost upon Tom, who was dead to everything but the proposed cataclysm. Seeing a puzzled and astonished look in the woman's face, he added excitedly, "Never fear, thou shalt be blameless. More thou shalt go free, none shall touch thee. Exert thy power." "Oh, my lord the king, I have it not, I have been falsely accused." "Thy fears stay thee. Be of good heart, thou shalt suffer no harm. Make a storm, it mattereth not how small a one, I require not great or harmful, but indeed prefer the opposite, do this and thy life is spared. Thou shalt go out free with thy child, bearing the king's pardon and safe from hurt or malice from any in the realm." The woman prostrated herself and protested with tears that she had no power to do the miracle, else she would gladly win her child's life alone, and be content to lose her own, if by obedience to the king's command so precious a grace might be acquired. Tom urged the woman still adhered to her declarations. Finally he said, "I think the woman hath said true, and my mother were in her place, and, gifted with the devil's functions, she had not stayed a moment to call her storms and lay the whole land in ruins, if the saving of my forfeit life were the price she got. It is argument that other mothers are made in like mold. Thou art free, good wife, thou and thy child, for I do think thee innocent. Now thou'st not to fear, being pardoned, pull off thy stockings. And thou canst make me a storm, thou shalt be rich." The redeemed creature was loud in her gratitude, and proceeded to obey, whilst Tom looked on with eager expectancy, a little marred by apprehension, the courtiers at the same time manifesting decided discomfort and uneasiness. The woman stripped her own feet and her little girls also, and plainly did her best to reward the king's generosity with an earthquake, but it was all a failure and a disappointment. Tom sighed and said, "There, good soul, trouble thyself no further, thy power is departed out of thee. Go thy way in peace, and if it return to thee at any time, forget me not, but fetch me a storm." The dinner hour drew near, yet strangely enough the thought brought but slight discomfort to Tom, and hardly any terror. The morning's experiences had wonderfully built up his confidence. The poor little ash-cat was already more wonted to his strange garret, after 4 days' habit, than a mature person could have become in a full month. A child's facility in accommodating itself to circumstances was never more strikingly illustrated. Let us privileged ones hurry to the great banqueting room and have a glance at matters there whilst Tom is being made ready for the imposing occasion. It is a spacious apartment, with gilded pillars and pilasters, and pictured walls and ceilings. At the door stand tall guards as rigid as statues, dressed in rich and picturesque costumes and bearing halberds. In a high gallery which runs all around the place is a band of musicians and a packed company of citizens of both sexes in brilliant attire. In the center of the room, upon a raised platform, is Tom's table. Now let the ancient chronicler speak. A gentleman enters the room bearing a rod, and along with him another, bearing a tablecloth which, after they have both kneeled 3 times, with the utmost veneration he spreads upon the table, and after Kneeling again they both retire. Then come two others, one with the rod. Again the other with a salt cellar, a plate and bread. When they have kneeled as the others had done, and placed what was brought upon the table, they too retire with the same ceremonies performed by the first. At last come two nobles richly clothed, one bearing a tasting knife, who, after prostrating themselves 3 times in the most graceful manner, approach and rub the table with bread and salt, with as much awe as if the king had been present. So end the solemn preliminaries. Now, far down the echoing corridors, we hear a bugle blast and the indistinct cry, "Place for the king! Way! For the king's most excellent majesty!" These sounds are momently. Repeated they grow nearer and nearer, and presently, almost in our aces, the martial note peals and the cry rings out, "Way for the king!" At this instant the shining pageant appears, and files in at the door with a measured march. Let the chronicler speak again. First come gentlemen, barons, earls, knights of the garter, all richly dressed and bareheaded. Next comes the chancellor, between two, one of which carries the royal scepter, the other the sword of state in a red scabbard, studded with golden fleurs de lis, the point upwards. Next comes the king himself, whom, upon his appearing, 12 trumpets and many drums salute with a great burst of welcome, whilst all in the galleries rise in their places, crying, "God save the king!" After him come nobles attached to his person, and on his right and left march his guard of honor, his 50 gentlemen pensioners with gilt battle-axes. This was all fine and pleasant. Tom's pulse beat high, and a glad light was in his eye. He bore himself right gracefully, and all the more so because he was not thinking of how he was doing it, his mind being charmed and occupied with the blithe sights and sounds about him, and, besides, nobody can be very ungraceful in nicely fitting beautiful clothes after he has grown a little used to them, especially if he is for the moment unconscious of them. Tom remembered his instructions and acknowledged his greeting with a slight inclination of his plumed head, and a courteous, "I thank ye, my good people." He seated himself at table without removing his cap, and did it without the least embarrassment, for to eat with one's cap on was the one solitary royal custom upon which the kings and the Cantys met upon common ground, neither party having any advantage over the other in the matter of old familiarity with it. The pageant broke up and grouped itself picturesquely, and remained bareheaded. Now to the sound of gay music the yeomen of the guard entered, the tallest and mightiest men in England, they being carefully selected in this regard, but we will let the chronicler tell about it. The yeomen of the guard entered bareheaded, clothed in scarlet, with golden roses upon their backs, and these went and came, bringing in each turn a course of dishes, served in plate. These dishes were received by a gentleman in the same order they were brought, and placed upon the table, while the taster gave to each guard a mouthful to eat of the particular dish he had brought, for fear of any poison. Tom made a good dinner, notwithstanding he was conscious that hundreds of eyes followed each morsel to his mouth and watched him eat it with an interest which could not have been more intense if it had been a deadly explosive and was expected to blow him up and scatter him all about the place. He was careful not to hurry, and equally careful not to do anything whatever for himself, but wait till the proper official knelt down and did it for him. He got through without a mistake, flawless and precious triumph. When the meal was over at last, and he marched away in the midst of his bright pageant, with the happy noises in his ears of blaring bugles, rolling drums, and thundering acclamations, he felt that if he had seen the worst of dining in public, it was an ordeal which he would be glad to endure several times a day if by that means he could but buy himself free from some of the more formidable requirements of his royal office.